The theme for today's discussion is broad enough that it can cover everything under the sun, everything in the universe. And what I propose is to lay before you a perspective that comes from the tradition of yoga. You are all familiar with yoga as an exercise, a means of improving health, a means of developing concentration, or even a means of healing. But the body of yogic knowledge is much broader. And in India, it represents a tradition which is, in many ways, mirrors the approach of science. That it is not a belief system, but rather an exploration of reality and of the human potential. Over the last about 10,000 years, in continuity, unbroken continuity, many mystics, yogis, and sages exploring the domain of and the experience of reality have gathered together a body of knowledge and experience and developed a technology which is a technology of consciousness. We are familiar with modern science's explorations of matter and the development of technology that allows you to master matter and material processes. But this is a technology that allows you to develop mastery of your own awareness and your own innate human potential. So what I propose to present is a perspective that comes from this body of knowledge. We will look at what we are made of and how the human individuality and personality works from a yogic perspective, and what it represents for our journey of life and the transition across lives. We will look at its aspects from a perspective of health, from a higher perspective of potential, which broadly go into paranormal capacities that human beings have, and also look at its implications in our day-to-day life when we work under conditions of extreme stress and pressure. So the first important idea that I will put forward is that observing a human being, we recognize that we are not just this body. Modern science is almost exclusively focused on what we would call the gross physical body. Gross because it is dense and crude, but we have finer, subtler layers which also are a form and a body. And so we make a distinction in the yogic tradition between the gross body and the subtle body. But I'm going to touch upon this from a perspective which also includes the explorations of modern science and its cutting-edge experiments. There was a series of experiments conducted in about 60 years ago in Russia by a scientist by the name Kirlian. And so the technique he developed is still called Kirlian photography, where the human hand is placed on a photographic plate under high voltage and high frequency. And the resulting image shows not only the form of the hand, but around the hand it shows like a glowing plasmic extension, which we call the aura. What was interesting was that as they took photos of different people, they found this aura extension changed according to the mood, the psychological state, thoughts and emotions of a person. It was also highly influenced by the biological internal states as they related to the emotions. And so over a period of many decades, the knowledge and the technology was refined until they were able to conclude that in fact, there is an extension well beyond the physical body that is being photographed by this method and that represents us. I will give a dramatic experiment whose evidence you can find even on the internet in the form of photographs. They took a leaf from a tree, placed it on this device and took a photo, and you could see not only the leaf, the aura of the leaf, but also the fine, subtle channels of energy flowing in the leaf, like lines that typically you will see in maps of acupuncture. And that's a very nice picture. Next, they cut through the leaf. and took a photo again. And this time you could see in the photo that the physical tissue of the leaf was cut, but the larger aura extension was completely intact. You are photographing the subtle form, the subtle extension of the leaf. And then as they watched through a series of images, that aura extension began to fade out until it collapsed to the physical form of the leaf. Now this has extraordinary implications when you think about it. One of the implications is that people who have had their limbs cut by accident, or injuries, they still experience, as you know, what is called a phantom limb effect. That they feel now their missing hand is itching and they want to scratch it, except they can't feel the physical body. And it's a big problem. How do you deal with that? Because it's so irritating. You have no way of touching it. Of course, the biologist will say it's just ripples in the brain. But from the yogic perspective, you would say, well, there is there is still a subtle hand. That's the thing which is feeling the itch. And there must be some way to be able to deal with it. So this is one of the examples, many such examples of scientific explorations which confirm these principles. But we start with the idea that this body we have is only one of several layers. In the yoga tradition, we speak of 5 bodies. The first 3 of which we are conscious, the other 2 we are almost unaware of entirely. Let's focus on the first 3. You have a gross body. What is it that animates this gross body? What makes the organs work? What makes the cells grow or die? And we observe that there is a drive of energy that pushes and molds everything and makes everything work. And the energy is not just a vague, unformed energy. The energy itself flows in very specific forms and structures. And if those channels of energy flow are somehow blocked or they are disconnected, then it affects the physical health, because now the biology does not get its feeder energy that sustains its processes. And a lot of this knowledge is captured in the science of acupuncture or acupressure, where they map the energy flows and then play with those. There's a dramatic video of acupuncture experts in China who did something to a patient who was to undergo open heart surgery. Instead of using conventional anesthetics which are pumped into the bloodstream to knock out the mind and to make the person unconscious, they stuck a series of needles at different parts of the body and twirled the needles until the entire region of the chest became numb. And after that, they put a piece of cardboard so the fellow cannot see what's happening on his chest. And all the rest of the open heart surgery took place with the patient completely conscious. The numbness created only by the twirling of needles stuck at specific points, which are not even connected to the physical nervous system. They belong to the acupuncture nervous system, which is an energy system and not a physical system. So there are many maps you might find in different places of how the energy flows. But what is interesting is there are energy systems which can be tapped through needles, but the energy flows can also be tapped by changing the body positions. So one of the things we find is there's a major energy flow in the arm which divides into the 5 fingers. And if you connect different fingers in different ways, you're actually creating circuit connections of the energy flows. And if you change the connections in certain patterns, you can actually modify your psychological and even physiological states. And this is one of the things you will find in the yoga tradition. People who sit, for example, to concentrate will sit with the fingers like this. Have you ever done that yourself, perhaps? And you're taught perhaps by your parents, oh, when you sit to concentrate, you meditate, you hold your fingers like this. And if you ask them why, they will tell you, well, that's how I was taught. But there's no simple answer given. In fact, I'll just touch upon how it works here. The 5 fingers represent 5, in the yoga tradition, the 5 elements which you're familiar with. Here the thumb is the fire principle, the air principle, ether, earth, and water. So when, for example, you connect the fire principle with the fire principle is also aligned to your willpower. And connecting with the air principle, which is the expansiveness of your awareness, you're as if limiting your awareness, focusing it, and bringing it into alignment and concentration. So keeping your fingers like this with the other fingers together is a posture, mudra we say in Sanskrit, which automatically creates a ripple effect in your energy body that compels your awareness to become stable, still, and centered. And so it's a useful tool. You don't need it. You could do the same by just willing your awareness directly, but it's a tool. You're tapping into the energy circuit of the system. As a variation, let me show you how this being the air principle, the index finger, it also relates to all of the biological processes which involve expansion and gaseous processes. So if you have too much flatulence, then they teach you the mudra of suppressing the air principle by compressing the index finger with the thumb. And if you sit like this, it will reduce or control flatulence, for example. Okay. So this is just to show you how there is in fact an energy body which has physical ramifications which you can tap into by physical processes. And in this way you will understand what people do when they learn to control their breath in the exercises called pranayam, or even in certain postures which we call asanas, which is what is normally categorized as yoga here when you go to a yoga studio. They have enormous implications in the energy body and can change your health, even revitalize the entire system just by doing certain what appear to be very simple postures and breathing exercises. But behind that is this quite a complex science. The third body is recognized when we look at what controls the energy flows. What is it that holds all the processes of the biology and the energy in harmony? When you actually observe a single cell in the body under the microscope, we notice a single cell has about 10,000 different processes simultaneously ongoing, spanning the entirety of the cell. And all of these 10,000 processes need to be synchronized, held in harmony. What is the intelligence inside the cell which does it? In fact, the cell can be likened to an entire country or a whole city. You have the outer peripheral wall, and the wall itself involves an intelligence to allow only the raw materials that the cell needs and to keep everything else out. Anything poisonous and harmful should be kept out. Anything which it needs should be taken only up to a degree and not in excess, so that you do not overload the cell. On the other hand, internally within the cell, there's a transport system to take the raw material to where it's actually required. And as a byproduct of the cellular processes, there's a waste material which by the transport system must be brought out to the cell walls to be expelled. Now, just this simple process, you can imagine what a complexity it entails. And then inside the cells, all the processing systems are so complex. There are also the energy producers, the power source, which are generating energy for the rest of the cells to work. And in the midst of this is what we call the DNA structure. The DNA structure appears to be passive. It's folded up inside the cell, remember? And yet it seems to control everything in the cells. And how does it do that? And so today there's a whole aspect of genetics that we call epigenetics. It's the interface between the genetic structure, which appears to be fixed, and the actual processes in the cells. And now we discover something fascinating. The epigenetic processes are two-way processes. So the gene structure is influencing the cell processing, but on the other hand, what happens in the cells is then mapped back into the genes. So with experiments with rats, we notice that if a rat is put through extreme stress, its progeny inherits the stress response. Let's say the rat has been put through stress, and the stress is associated with a certain image or a certain sound. The children of the rats now inherit that response. Whenever they see that image or hear that sound, they tend to get stressed. What makes for that transmission, which is a learned behavior? It's not a change in the DNA. It's part of the epigenetic processes. And so we're discovering that our understanding of the genes is very limited. And we're rapidly growing to recognize this dynamism and an intelligence that operates, which is not static, which is involved in the life experience and somehow links it to the core and actually transmits it through the hereditary system. So this third layer is the intelligence, the awareness which coordinates all these complex activities, not only within a single cell, but across the cells, across the organs in the body. Now, when you look at a patient who is in the hospital and we say, oh, his sugar level's gone up, there's a whole chain reaction that follows. Normally, in a healthy person, automatically there's a corrective response to the biology to bring it back in balance. And there's a continuous dynamism of all kinds of things swinging up and down, but always held in balance. Now, this patient is in the hospital because that dynamic balance is somehow messed up. It's not able to correct itself. And what does the doctor do? He only introduces certain further chemicals to try to help the body to correct itself. The moment the body gets back its rhythm, you say, you're well now, you can go home. What's the actual reality of our sugar level in the body? You've just eaten food, your sugar is spiked. And the body does not bother with it. It's fine. It'll come down, we'll bring it down as needed. Right now it needs to be up. And so there's a whole dynamic fluctuation of every single substance in the bloodstream, but always held in balance with an extraordinary intelligence. So complex that we cannot map it even. We can only observe certain relationships and make certain general empirical statements. And all of this is held together by an intelligence which is aware of the biology processes, the energy processes, and knows how to bring it into harmony. And none of this is part of our conscious intelligence. So we are actually looking at a third layer, which is the awareness and intelligence, of which our conscious intelligence is one tiny part, the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of the rest of the awareness and intelligence is held in this layer that we will call in the yogic system, the conscious body. So let me use the Sanskrit terms. The gross physical is the annamaya, which is the food body. The next layer is the energy body, pranamaya, which is the life force body, chi, ki, prana, equivalent terms. And the third layer, manomaya, which is the mind, mental awareness body. The other two are much finer and they represent our spiritual potential. We may touch upon it later if necessary, but we'll focus for now on these three. What is interesting is all these three bodies interpenetrate and are therefore interdependent. If you do something to the gross physical body, its ripple effect affects your emotions and your mind. Equally, if you think about something strongly, it affects the energy body and the gross physical body. Or if you're emotionally disturbed, it affects your mind and your gross body. Now that's pretty obvious, isn't it? That's what makes for us to be an individual, self-aware, and a unit that's functioning as an independent unit. But recognize that each of these three has its own particular requirements for good health. Each of these three has its own particular needs and drives and instincts. And each of these three is fundamentally a different and independent substance and layer. Once we recognize this, then a lot of the difficulties of life become easier to manage, including managing stress, which we will touch upon later, but other things which we thought impossible or which we experienced but could not explain now become more evident. As an example, the energy body, being primarily made of energy, is influenced by any energy in the environment. Just as your gross body is influenced by the physical circumstances, your energy body is influenced by energy in the environment. So if you enter a space where a large number of people are gathered with excitement, there's a demonstration, a political demonstration going on, for example, or there is a rock concert that's going on and people are jumping and screaming in excitement. If you enter that space, or even if you approach it, that power and agitation of the energy hits you and even enters you and seizes you. You will feel yourself in the grip of this excitement, unable to modify, unable to control yourself. And you might find yourself starting to jump and scream and shout. Afterwards, when you've moved away from that space and the energy connection is broken, you will wonder, why did I behave like that? Why did I say that? Why did I do that? It's so unlike me. But you're not conscious that at that point it was not you. You'd just been possessed by the energy which was not yours. Something more refined but equivalent happens when you're dealing with people. You meet somebody and he gives you a strong grip, handshake, a pump of energy, and you feel yourself suddenly perked up and energetic. There's actually a transmission of energy that's taking place in that contact. Or the reverse. You're feeling great this morning, you met somebody, you had perhaps a brief interaction, and you come away and you find yourself depleted, as if deflated, a balloon which has lost all its power. And what happened? I don't know. I just met this person and came away, and it's like everything is gone. Sometimes it may involve a conversation, but that's irrelevant. It's the contact of the energy that takes place. Or you notice somebody at a distance. Even before you have come together and met, you feel that this person is upset, or the person is depressed, or something about him which feels out of sorts, and you might choose to avoid. What did you feel at that distance? I was speaking this morning to a few people in the hospitality industry, and one of the examples I gave them was, you see someone coming in through the door and you know this will be a problem customer. And it works out that way. How do you know it? You sense on some level. What level is that? It's actually your energy body that senses the person's energy. Because your energy body, unlike the gross physical body, is not limited to this physical space. It extends well beyond. And it's even fluid in its expanse. It can expand out, it can narrow down. When you are, for example, in a situation that requires you to command a group of people or a large space, your energy body automatically expands to include that space. When you want to be unseen and avoid being recognized and want to sneak in somehow through a group, you shrink and somehow people don't notice you. There's a very interesting example from the life of Marilyn Monroe. You know that she had this extraordinary effect on people, as is the case with most charismatic people. So one of her friends narrates how they went shopping. Marilyn Monroe is going shopping and no one notices her. And at some point she tells her friend, now watch. And she shakes herself up, and suddenly everybody around perks up and turns and looks at her. Hey, there's Marilyn Monroe. What did she just do? She had shrunk her energy, she opened it out and reached out and connected. And it had that effect. Now there are people who do it consciously, as she did. Most of us do it unconsciously. But if you had a clairvoyant sight, that is the power to see on a subtle level, you'd actually see around people this form of the aura and see colors, see shapes and forms in it which represent the way the energy flows and the state of emotions and even illness. One of the things you see in the aura is a dark patch in a certain part. And you know, aha, this is where the fellow is going to catch an illness soon. And it often takes a few weeks or a month before it hits the gross body and becomes an illness in that part. So let me explain this a little bit. You notice when you have strong emotions, they affect you physically. You're angry, where does it hit you? Below, in the lower abdomen, isn't it? When you're happy, where do you feel it? Generally in the upper part of the chest. Center of the chest often. When you fear, where does that hit you? Belly and in the bowels. So when you're very afraid, it's like your bowels, you lose control of your bowels. They feel loose, they feel fluid. Now what happens if you experience anger again and again and again? It's almost like there's a knot that forms in the stomach region, which becomes a state of tension after a while, until it acquires a physical character and begins to affect physical processes in the abdomen. Remember, all biological processes are controlled by the energy flow. If the energy becomes knotted, then the physical process will be to that degree blocked or distorted. And the result is this person has now developed a habit of, or has developed an illness of acidity, bile. And you will notice the connection. Anger does something there which creates a kind of a heat in the stomach. And that is what represents in the physical body as excess of acid or bile. If you correct the energy knot, again it takes a few weeks to ripple down to the gross body before that particular habit in the gross body changes. Now, if you had a habit of anger, you can take all the antacid you want. It will suppress the symptoms but not solve the problem. And in order to solve the problem, you need to go up one step to the psychological root cause of it. Another interesting connection that I will relate you to is the diseases of the lungs, such as tuberculosis, which involve an infection in certain extreme parts of the lungs. You're breathing normally, but the edge, the extreme lower portions of the lungs tend to have stale air. And that's where the infections catch easily. So I'm showing you here a relationship between the energy body and the gross physical body, because that's where the health imprint, the health impact of this is felt maximally. Behind that, in the mental body, again, you have grooves. Let's say a person is stubborn. You've seen people who are stubborn? You will notice something in the body is rigid. They walk in a certain way which is a bit fixed. It's like either the shoulders or in the waist, some part of the movement of the body is no more fluid. It's no more harmonious. It's no more flexible. And the stubbornness in the mind reflects itself in the energies, creating a kind of a block, which reflects in the gross body, which becomes a rigidity. How do you correct it? Well, you can go all the way to the top, change the stubbornness, much harder to do with most people, but it's possible. Sometimes a crisis in life will break that stubbornness, force you to be more flexible, and the biology follows. Or you could go the reverse way. Make the body plastic. Take up the practice of what you call yoga, asanas, the postures of yoga. Make the body flexible, and the result will be the energy flows will get deblocked. And as a consequence, you'll find your thinking becomes clearer. Because these things are vicious cycles. A blockage of rigidity in the thought creates blockage in energy, which feeds back on the blockage of thought. You've broken the vicious cycle by a physical change. It's the reason why what appears to be so simple, you do a few stretches, you feel good, has such a massive shift in your awareness, not only energetically on the health, but in your thoughts and even the clarity of your mind. Those who actually take up these practices, they discover within a month or so, the mind becomes clearer, calmer, and freer. So you can see how this has massive implications in your capacity to cope with the stresses of life. We will still deal with the question of stress from a different perspective later on, but when you see in connection of these three layers of the bodies, you can see how one influences the other, and modifying any one of them can be a starting point. But if you work on all three simultaneously, that's the most effective way of changing anything within yourself. Now, this is the model first that I'm placing before you, three bodies. We've already looked at certain health implications. We've looked at certain paranormal processes. You sense people at a distance. But there are other implications also. At the level of the mind, for example, if you have a strong thought, that also affects, because the other person's mental body and your mental body are as if in a continuum. Look at it this way. The gross body limits are defined by the substance of your body. Your energy body is larger, wider, more flexible. The mind body extends even further. Consider, if I ask you right now, think of somebody whom you love very much, who's not here right now. Perhaps a parent, a child, a friend, a spouse. And think about them intensely. And very quickly you begin as if to enter in a kind of a connection, as if in your mind or in your heart you feel connected, you feel close. Now this actually happens every time we make a phone call. You speak to somebody. Of course, it's different when you have a business call, but when you have a strong emotional connection, you feel it most easily. You speak to somebody, and after a while you close your eyes when you're listening to the person, as if you're connecting and getting into the person, feeling what they feel, feeling what they think. And the person could be on the other side of the earth, but the connection is as if they were right next to you. And this is possible because in your mental awareness, in fact, you are extended and part of, sensitive to the entire continuum of awareness of the mind substance that extends everywhere. That's how we feel and know each other. Especially when there's a strong emotional, energetic connection, the thought contact is more easy because you're tuning in and separating from the clutter of the thoughts in the environs. That's a common experience most of you who are parents would have had, that you suddenly feel inside you that something is wrong with your child. Something is not okay. And then you look at the child, you ask a few questions and you discover, oh yes, there's a problem there. But you got the sense of it well before. There are very interesting studies involving dogs, and they're often more close to us than other human beings. So there's a video camera set in the house monitoring the dog. The owner of the dog, its parent effectively, is sitting in his office, and suddenly the owner says, it's time to go now, and he starts winding up. The moment he's shifted his orientation to want to go home, you see on the video the dog gets up and now starts looking at the window or the door. As the owner is driving home, the dog gets excited and starts moving around the house. When the owner turns into the road that comes to the house, the dog rushes to the door and either starts scratching, tapping, or barking. And within a minute or so, the owner has reached the house. Now, this sort of thing has been done again and again. How do you explain it? And the only explanation you have is that we are in fact connected. The reality is we are connected to everything in the universe. But we are more connected to the things that interest us. We are most connected to the things that we love because we put energy there and want to build that bond. But we are also most connected to the things that we hate. Because hatred after all is just kind of a negative love. I love to hate that guy. I love to think about him all the time with feelings of hatred. But I love it, right? In fact, there's no such thing as hatred. It's just love that has got perverted in a strange way. And those are the things which bind you. And just as someone you love is connected to you, someone you hate is also connected to you. And through that connection, you're exchanging negative energy, which messes up your life. You can choose to cut that cord. Free yourself from that hatred, and the cord fades out. Initially, it keeps pulling you back. Have you had this experience? You want to forget something, it keeps bothering you. It's like the thought gets into you, tugs at your heart, and provokes a reaction within you. The reality is this, that every time you have a strong thought or a strong emotion, it forms a unit, a bundle of energy that is released into the environment. Again, this can be seen clairvoyantly. And when a repeated series of thoughts or energy forms are thrown out, a connection, a sustained habit forms. That's the reason why when you break up after a romantic affair, it's extremely painful. It's like something feels as if being torn from you. Most of you would have gone through this at some time or other, at least in your teenage. You form a bond of connection, of affection, sometimes very intense, and then things go bad and you break up. And you feel this thing like a cord being torn apart, something being uprooted from within your heart. For a while you feel a hollowness and an emptiness which you want to fill somehow. All of these descriptions are actually visible to the clairvoyant sight. You can see an energy bond literally being uprooted. You feel the fibers of your body being torn in that. And it takes a while to heal. Just as the gross body takes a while to heal, even the subtle body takes a while to heal. So our thoughts, our emotions have a reality. They belong to the domain of a subtler grade of reality. And they have an enormous impact on circumstances, even as upon us, our health and our relationships. So if you put out repeatedly a positive thought, the energy bundle of the positive thought will tend to go out and try to actualize itself. If you put out a negative thought, that will tend to actualize. So when you have fear, what if I have an accident? What if I lose this? What if that thing fails? And you keep brooding over it. You're creating an energy bundle that goes out to try to actualize itself. And in a sense, what we fear, we attract and make to happen. So in your work, in your personal life, you have to be very careful what you think and feel. Do not build up habits of negative thinking, because they will tend to happen by your own compulsion. You made it happen. Instead, when you have to deal with negative options, you look at it, okay, what if this happens? Okay, I'll do this. And then you don't think about it again. The brooding is what gives it energy. And the same in terms of your relationships. Most of us have had this experience in life that we suddenly found ourselves in a bad relationship with somebody for almost no reason at all, or for something trivial. Someday a person said a word in anger or upset. He may have forgotten because he was just upset for a different reason. You hold it in your heart and then you brood about it. Why did he say that? What a nasty, mean fellow. I've done so much for him. And it continues to bother you. It pops up in your sleep. In the middle of the night, you wake up and start wondering or worrying about it. And all of that is energy you're throwing at him. And the other person is thinking of you, and the energy connection brings with it this junk, painful, negative energy. And thinking of you, he suddenly feels negative, which is your energy. And he feels negative and throws negative energy back. And you enter very quickly into a kind of a vicious cycle. What started as a tiny misunderstanding builds up into a full-blown conflict before you know it. And if you're conscious of it, you feel it building up, you break the cycle. Refuse to get into a negative engagement. Instead, consciously send out positive, loving, caring thoughts, compassion, neutrality, if not anything else. Even against the people whom you love to hate the most. You put a neutrality at best, and you'll find the vicious cycle breaks and even may open the way to a positive opportunity. The person who once was in conflict with you may end up even becoming a good friend, because you took the trouble to build a bond of positivity. Now, I've shifted the whole discussion to a level of engagement in our social life where almost nothing of what we're doing physically, speaking or doing matters. The whole thing is taking place on a psychological level. And it's so vivid, so real, that it determines often our behavior at a physical level. Most people are unconscious to such a degree. The thought comes, the emotion comes, hits them, and they behave, thinking it's their choice. And there are very simple experiments one can do to demonstrate this. And people who have that capacity can actually do that. I've seen a friend of mine, anywhere on the road, you could point out a dog. He would stare at the dog, and within about 30 seconds, the dog would get up, turn around, and start barking at him. And actually, it's possible for almost any one of us to do it. But we're doing this unconsciously all the time when we throw negative or positive energies. So become conscious of your thoughts, of your emotions, not only for their impact on your health, but also on the impact on your relationships and on your circumstances. Now, this power of creativity to influence circumstances is ours. It's a gift. Most of us here are professionals perhaps, or are related to certain professions. And you know that if you want to do something, if you want to aim for a particular outcome, you have to first start by conceiving it. And the more detail that you can bring into the conception, the more clearly you can form the outcome. The more you're able to put into it your personal energy, the more you're able to energize that concept, that idea. And then the rest of your physical efforts only go to support it. Now, this is so effective that there are many examples of this where people have put forward a strong intention, and materially circumstances begin to align themselves to make this happen. In practice, if you surround yourself, if your aura is full of positivity, it will tend to attract positive energies and positive circumstances. If you surround yourself with a negative energy, it will tend to attract those things. You'll notice when you enter a room, let's say there's a party going on, 100 people perhaps, you enter the room, your first instinct is you scan through. And in your quick scan, a few individuals pop up. This. It's that quick. It happens instantaneously. We're not even conscious of it. And automatically you tend to be attracted to those 2 or 3 people because you feel the resonance, you feel the comfort of a certain similarity or attraction, isn't it? And these are the things which really determine our interests and relationships. There's a very interesting study that shows when a group of, let's say, students comes to a college or university and they're sitting in a first group meeting, often the people sitting next to each other will become the best of friends. Something like 80% of the cases, 2 people who are sitting next to each other in the first sitting, which was completely random apparently, happened to end up being the best of friends for years thereafter. The reality is this: none of the sitting was random. As you walk in and choose a place to sit, there's this automatic filtration taking place on your subliminal levels. You feel this comfortable, that uncomfortable, and you end up being somewhere where you feel the alignments to be energetically comfortable. Why? Because you are already birds of a feather, so to say. You're already similar energetically. This, once you become aware of these things, you'll find a whole different world opens to you in your life. Now, all of this begs the question, where is it all leading? Where are we going with this? From childhood through adulthood, we're struggling to develop our individuality, develop the capacities of our personality, and it's on all 3 levels. Your body grows, your emotional nature becomes more mature, your mind becomes more skillful, intelligent, penetrating in insight. Once you've reached a certain point of individuation, you're now an individual, you're an independent adult, then begins your real life journey. Some people take a little longer, some a little shorter, in different layers. And it's not just your body's growth. The biology growth is pretty much fixed by the time you're 21 or 22. But the other levels may still be maturing. But all of that leads to the formation of an individuality. For what? What happens after that? You realize your pursuit of life is driven by certain things that you feel from within spontaneously to be more interesting than other things which you feel less interesting. Ask yourself, what determines that? What are you really chasing? You're chasing what's interesting. So let's say you went to a particular activity which you found interesting. As a teenager, you found your parties to be very interesting. First time it was fascinating, it was so wonderful, so exciting. The second time it was okay, the third time it was been there, done that. Fourth time you say no thanks. What happened there? And it's the same thing in our adult life. Certain things are interesting and after a while they just fade out. What happened there? What changes within you? The initial novelty always gives you an experience of, I'm learning something, I'm growing. And after that, the growth potential that the circumstance offers is finished. That's all it could give you. I will go deeper into this idea. Consider what happens when you go to an activity, let's say a lecture, a music concert, or an interaction with a group. After a particular activity, you come back and you say, oh, that was fascinating. Another case, you go somewhere, different lecture, music, or activity, you come back and you say, that was boring. What's the difference between these two? What is it internally, subjectively, that you feel that makes this interesting and that boring? If you observe, where you go back, where you go in as you were, you come out the same person. That was boring. You go in here, you come out a different person, changed. That was interesting. Effectively, growth equals interesting. Every time when through an activity you experience growth, you find it interesting. So when you went for your first, let's say, party, it was great fun, you came back saying, I want to have a party every day. Because you learned something, you grew in certain ways, you're not even conscious of what. But a few steps down the line, there's no more that it can give you. You've learned and drawn from it what you could, now you're looking for something more. What are you looking for? You're looking for life experiences that will give you the sense of growth. And what does it feel like when you have growth? What's happening to you subjectively? Something that within me was as if asleep wakes up and emerges. When you say, I have grown, what has grown? It's something which was inside, latent as a potential, as a possibility, now has come forward and is now an active part of your awareness, of your personality. Isn't it? It's not something you've taken from outside. The outside is only a trigger to draw out some innate capacity. It could be just knowledge, it could be an energetic power, or it could be a special skill that emerges. But when you look deeply enough in this way, the conclusion you come to, all experiences of life are valuable to the extent they help you draw out your innate potential, growth, in a direction which to you is fulfilling. Now, I could take you through a whole training program to give you the skill for playing guitar beautifully. And while you'll enjoy it up to a point, after a point you'll say, but you know what, I would rather be doing something else which is more aligned to my nature. So there's a kind of a template you see, and each one of us has a different template. There's a template where certain directions of activity give you more fulfillment in growth than other directions, which also give you, it's something interesting, but after a point you say, I'd rather do something else. That template is, we will use the term, your nature, your particular individual nature. In Sanskrit we say svabhava. You've heard this term perhaps, those who are familiar with the Sanskrit language. But that particular template determines your innate drives, your swadharma, your innate motivation, your innate truth. That's the term in Sanskrit, dharma, swadharma. And each one is unique. And when you pursue your innate drive, which is aligned to your innate map, so to say, imprint, you have the greatest satisfaction. Even if in terms of external causes you seem to fail. You've had this experience where you did something and you really put yourself in it. It didn't work out, but you still look back and say, I enjoyed it so much. It's not what others measure in terms of success, but your fulfillment in actually doing that. And generally when you take a line of that kind, that becomes your most fulfilling career. When you do things where even if you fail, you'll find it worthwhile to have done what you did. That's your ideal career. That's the thing which gives you the most satisfaction. And because you enjoy it, because it's your deepest sense of growth, inevitably you will succeed in it. Even if initially you pass through failures, they're just learning opportunities. If on the other hand you do something which is contrary to your nature, you may seem to succeed, I win every time that I'm able to, let's say, play the lottery. I win the money, but does it give me the satisfaction? That activity does not give you the satisfaction really. You're successful from a certain perspective, but it's not it. It's something like that. You may be doing something which gives you, in the eyes of others, the appearance of success, but eventually deep inside you, you'll say, I'd rather do something else. At best, you might accept that as a compromise to build your basic stability of finances. But after that, you'll move elsewhere. When the 9/11 attacks happened in New York, and quite a large number of people, because of the timing of the attack, quite a large number of people survived because they went to the office late. I have a friend who actually was delayed that morning. His breakfast was late. He missed his train, and he arrived there 20 minutes late, thinking that I'm going to get beaten up by my bosses for coming late. And he realized that he had just saved his life because his breakfast got delayed. You will say, fortuitous, grace, coincidence, whatever. But all those people who survived that attack, the shock of it made them review, what am I doing with my life? The same people who were earning large sums every day on what was effectively power gambling, high stress activity, suddenly with that shock asked, is that it? Is it so fragile? What am I here for? What do I really want? It was interesting to see a large number of the stock market players left that job, went into the countryside and took up things which they wanted to do from their childhood. That is indicative, you see. There was always behind something which for them was the deeper fulfillment, but somehow their lives took them in a different path. They got sucked into something and the shock awoke what was more important. I'm coming to this because it relates to something of the deeper sense of who we are. And this is the source of our deepest motivations and drives. And this term which I described earlier, your innate drive, Swadharma. And the form, the imprint of your nature, Swabhava. What determines that? We're coming now into space where I will describe it from the perspective of yoga, and rather than trying to validate it in terms of external forms of research, I would rather ask you to validate in terms of your own intuitive feel, what feels right. In the yogic perspective, we describe it thus, that when we choose to take birth, and it's always a choice, it's as if we come with a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, of growth that we want to experience. And often, though not always, we are attracted to an environment that is conducive to that kind of growth. Often we choose parents for a particular quality of nourishment that we will receive in our upbringing and in our life experience. Sometimes it comes with a package deal. It has other elements which you may or may not value, or you may even find detestable. But you came for a particular thing which attracted you into that space. And the journey of your life really then is along the broad lines of what you intended in your free choice. In that sense, that's your destiny. If somebody is sufficiently perceptive, you can observe a child. They say in India, if you observe a child while still in the cradle, you can see what direction his journey will take. It's not entirely untrue. You will see children who are very quiet, relaxed, and then you will see children who are active, who want to do. And that temperament will actually develop into their adult life. But more profoundly, you can observe the personality of a child in teenage and pretty much describe what direction his life journey will take. Because already by then it's taking a form. But that innate push which is driving you is coming from that inner core, the one that chose to take birth. And the journey of life is really a journey of fulfillment of that intent. And at the end of the life, you look back and you say, well, this was worth it. So many times you'll hear grandparents, aged people say, I've lived a full life. I did everything that I wanted to do and I'm fully satisfied. There's nothing more left that I really want or need. It's around that time that one begins a kind of a consolidation and the preparation to make the next transition. And in the first separation from the body, what you call death, you must understand what it means really, is you never die. It's your body that you shed and you say, okay, this body is unable to support what more I need and it's time to leave it. So in the text, in the sacred text of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find this description of the clothes. When you grow, your clothes begin to be a little too small for you. If you continue to grow, eventually your clothes start ripping apart, isn't it? So at that point you have to say, all right, I need to change clothes. So you drop your clothes and take on new ones more suited to your current form. Something like that is what we experience in the transition when we shed the body. There's always a point of choice. It's interesting to notice, if you read literature of people who had near-death experiences, there's a consistency across cultures and even across religious traditions. People around the world of any background of culture or religion have similar stories. At first, at the moment of the transition, there's like a flashback. You have a quick view of your whole life journey in a moment, in a fraction of a moment. And then a moment of choice. What do I want? Often they describe at the time of an accident, they're driving in a car, suddenly out of the corner of the eye they see something coming and wham! And momentarily it's as if time stops, flashback of life and the choice. And inevitably all near-death experiences, survivors will tell you, and they said, no, we have not finished our work. And then wham, the collision takes place and they survive. Sometimes with some disability or partial disability, but they survive. That moment of choice is a moment when the person, the you, true you, comes forward momentarily and reviews the situation and exercises the choice. Always at the time of leaving, there is the point of choice. Now the choice may be compelled upon you. The body is so badly damaged that I can't do much with it. Or it may be the body is damaged, but I'll still enjoy continuing in it, which is often the case in people who have become in coma, sometimes from accident or from some brain damage. They're in coma for a couple of decades even. And the person inside may say, well, this is an interesting experience. I'm quite comfortable here. Let's just enjoy it. I'm happy to just be. In some cases, they're able to hear and see things, sense things. In some cases, they're not, but they're just happy to be. Nice and warm and comfortable. Distantly, they feel emotions, voices, or thoughts of others. That's about it. The cases, for example, people who have been in coma for 20 or 30 years, suddenly getting up one day, fully conscious, and they say, well, I heard every single thing you people said, only I couldn't respond. Or there are equally people who were so deep in coma that they did not register the outer senses, but when they come back, they're just fine. Often the personality is much changed in the sense that they're more kind, more loving. Something of the deeper characters come forward and the outer hardened layers are as if dropped. So there is a choice always. But when the choice is made to shed the body, first is the dropping off of the gross body. And in the descriptions you will find of near-death experiences, they find themselves floating because the subtle body does not have weight. They're floating, they're moving around, they see people rushing on the body that's fallen and they say, but that's not me, I'm here. So often that experience of separating from your body is quite liberating because you realize, I don't die. If any of you have ever had an out-of-body experience, which is not uncommon, that gives you a similar sense. So, I'm describing what happens when you leave the body. First you shed the gross body, and then there are these other layers, which are, remember, also sheets, coverings. And those over time begin to kind of disintegrate equally as you disengage from them. In between, you experience the world, reality on those levels as you withdraw, until such time as you finally settle into what is the core of you. I'm going to take a few moments to elaborate on this. Do you remember when you were a student, when you had to prepare for an exam, how many hours you spent studying, learning things by heart? And then after you've gone through the exam, what remains within a few days, the whole thing is washed off. Nothing remains, right? What remains in you, though, is an overall imprint of all the things you tried to learn. If I ask you, do you remember your childhood, your years in school, your years in college, or your first job? What remains of that? Practically nothing, except a few essential elements which make you what you are today. Some deep learning, some shaping that took place in your personality, some profound shifts which define your individuality today. And today, as an adult, if you look back at your entire life and say, what of this is of value to you? Well, the food you had for breakfast 20 years ago has no meaning. Perhaps even the food you had for breakfast 10 days ago has no meaning, right? But the relationships and the things you absorb from the kinds of experiences you had, that stays. And now look back at your most painful experience of transition in your life. And you look back and say, yes, I learned so much from this. Sometimes the most difficult and the most painful experiences are also the greatest learning experiences forming your maturity today. And you look back and say, that was most valuable. However much I may have suffered during it, now I can look back and say, that was such a learning experience, isn't it? So that sum total of your learning experience is what remains with you. And as you disengage from your body and disengage from these layers, it's that which you absorb and which you are. There's a period which one can observe where the person withdraws and remains in a quiet state of, we use the word trance, assimilating, absorbing all the life experience. And then once again, when it's ready, turning around to look at the domain of life and say, what's the next adventure? What do I want? What do I really need? What do I want to experience? What's the growth that is most required? I'm going to ask you this question. If you had to do your whole life all over again, how would you want to do it? If you just think about it, it's obvious. What do you choose? You don't choose to repeat what you did, because that's done, you've learned. You choose to fill the part in your development where you feel the maximum lack, the gap, the thing missing to make you complete. That's what you want to focus on next, isn't it? And that's the sense. Spontaneously, the consciousness turns and says, this is what I want to develop. This is what I want to experience. And as it turns to the domain of form and life, it's attracted to the spaces where that kind of experience can be felt or had. The resonance that takes place in your overall feel. The same way that you're attracted to a person, I like this person, I like his vibes, it's familiar, it's comfortable. In the same way you turn to life, this space, this feeling, these people, I like this. And you're as if drawn to that. And of course, depending on the circumstances where human bodies can be taken up, there's an entry into that domain and a connection that takes place either before birth, during, or after birth. That is a fluid experience. The more mature souls can actually be in the environment while still the fetus is in formation. They can even preside over the formation of the fetus and infuse elements of their personality into the body that's being developed. And gradually, over a few days, weeks, or even months, and transitioning after birth, they fully enter and now have the human experience. Or otherwise, it may be at the time of birth, or even completing over a few days or weeks after. But the idea being, both the disengagement of separation and the re-engagement to re-enter life involve freedom and choice of the deepest core that is you. And this is a very important factor to keep in mind. The journey of life itself was a chosen journey. We chose to enter it for the possibilities of growth and experience that it offers to us. And we are free to experience differently over a period of time. In the personal experience, as you are able to concentrate and center yourself in your inmost core, you experience this. You become aware of the sense of immortality. You know that you are really free and you are there permanently. You are eternal. And the journey of past lives also can be either come into your awareness, or just the sense of freedom is enough that you have no more fear. You do what you have to do and you continue, and you will continue, and nothing can stop that. And that's a great freedom when you have that. But this center is where the deepest motivations of your life exist. Sri Aurobindo uses a vocabulary to describe this core. He calls it the psychic being, the inmost and true soul within us. And then there are many layers in our personality, all the way to the most superficial parts, where we are primarily driven by our desires, impulsions, reactions, and habits. And then there's deep core, where we are primarily spontaneously free, and we simply do what we are. And in between all these layers, in a sense, the sense of fate or compulsion is binding on the surface, and the sense of freedom is complete in the core, and everything in between. Depending on the level at which you live and from which you live, you experience greater freedom or greater binding and compulsion in life. And all of this relates to the challenge we are facing today in our current life. I'll now align it to the question of stresses. When you live on the edge, on the periphery of your personality, where you're primarily a bundle of desires, reactions, habits, you're programmed already. Given a situation, I know how you'll react, isn't it? You anticipate that of others. Well, if you are dealing with your boss, you know that when your boss gets to know this, he's going to say exactly these words. And when he starts saying those words, in your mind you're repeating what he's going to say next. It's almost like a robot. But on the other hand, when you are disengaged from the surface, closer to your center, the reaction is not there. Something hits you, you can choose to not react, you can choose to wait, and then you can choose to act in freedom precisely as needed for a given situation. That's when your actions are most effective. That's when they can resolve the situation, rather than exaggerate the problem by a bundle of reactions. That's when also you experience yourself as free. And you have also the satisfaction of what you do. You will find there are some people who are naturally always in a state of calm and quiet, even in the face of provocation. And they seem to be always in mastery of their circumstances. There are others who might be always excitable and agitated, and they're always running around trying to catch up from one crisis to another. And it's only this where you live from and where you act from. And so it's worth it for you, for all of us, to make the effort to disengage from the surface reactive I, to center yourself a little more. And the more you come to the center, the more you find you have the poise of freedom, and from there the greater mastery. And if you come all the way to the center, you have the greatest mastery and greatest freedom. So I'll give you the analogy of the wheel. Life around you is whirling like a wheel, right? Circumstances around you are whirling. Everything is in movement. Even your own personality is almost like a whirling wheel. The farther out you are on the edge of the wheel, the more fast-paced, the more you're swept away. You stand there, you can't stay still. Vroom, it pushes you. The closer you come to the wheel, the less things seem to move. And at the center of the wheel, it looks like nothing moves. But everything depends on this. The outer edge of the wheel cannot move if not for the support of the center. So the reality is this: the power center is in the center. The result of that is on the edge. So do you want to belong to the realm of the results where things are already pre-programmed, or do you want to come closer to the core where you can choose how the wheel moves? And the more you're able to come to the center, the less you're affected, buffeted by circumstances, and the less you're stressed. Stress is what happens when circumstances squeeze you and imprison you, prevent your freedom. When you disengage and come to the center, whatever happens outside, the most extreme tornado, you're in the center. You're free. And you can choose to exercise your freedom and deal with the situation without getting swayed away. And so in the long run, this is a practice one has to consciously cultivate, that you spend a little time every day where you consciously center yourself and come as deep or as close as you can to your deepest center. And from there, you look out towards life. Look at all the things you have to do during the day, during the week, during the years, doesn't matter. You look at things from that center of freedom. And naturally, automatically, spontaneously, there'll be a kind of a prioritizing. This is more important, that is less important. This is urgent, that can wait. It'll be obvious. You won't even have to think it out. And it will be, because it's the core of you, the most authentic way of arranging it. With logic, you can argue out anything. But when you see from the center, it's obvious. It transcends logic, and it's spontaneous and effortless. But every morning, spend a little time to center yourself. Many of you perhaps have a routine where you may sit down and do some prayers. That helps. But generally, the habit of prayer is the turning out. You're making a prayer either as a mechanical habit, or you're turning out towards a form or a focus external to you. The same prayer could be done with a turn inwards, where you conceive of or feel that divine presence deep within you. Or simply center yourself and use the prayer as a means of deepening the center. Or sit wordlessly without form of prayer, simply feeling deep within you the deepest core of your aspirations, or the deepest source of love or compassion, or just feel behind the sense of stillness, silence, where you simply are without doing, and remain in that for a while. And when thus centered, from there you turn, you will find you can re-embrace life, and with a base of stability which nothing else can equal. It's a very simple practice, but it puts you at the center of the three bodies, and therefore puts you in charge, in mastery. There's a very interesting statement which comes in the Bhagavad Gita, where it is said that in order to be master of your circumstances, samrat is the word in Sanskrit, meaning the king. In order to be master of circumstances, you must first be master of yourself. Swarat is the word. Unless you can master yourself, you cannot master your circumstances, because effectively your circumstances are a reflection or an outcome of what you are internally. In a way, all the crises out there can take place because within you there's a conflict. And when you can resolve things within you, you're able to then impact circumstances and heal those conflicts outside you. So it's a very profound idea, but you can see why it is important to do this practice of centering. Its impact on another level is even on your body, on your thoughts, and on your emotions. Because when you're in the center, and from there you move out, you are spontaneously true to yourself, but also what you bring out in your thoughts are not the old habits, the rigidities, the reactions, but a relaxed freedom. As a result, when you bring that into your body's health will improve. You bring that into your emotions will become clear and positive. Your mind will become still, clear, bright. Your power of intuition will begin to be active. Unlike intelligence, which is rationally thought out, intuition points and goes straight at the source. We use the word intuition. But what is intuition? But a knowledge which is coming from a source that is not thought out, which cannot be corrupted. And that's in your core. The inner being's sight sees things for what they are. Just as the body can only engage with physical objects, your emotions can engage with energies, your mind can engage with ideas, your inmost soul engages with the essence of things. And when it sees a situation, instantly, effortlessly, you feel this feels right, that somehow feels not okay. Now you don't know what it is, but you just feel it's not okay. At that point, you start using the other faculties. Your mind steps up and says, what's wrong? I feel something wrong here. Let's explore, and it finds the problem. The other side feels right, and you say, okay, I follow my feel. People speak of gut feel, but gut feel is still a reflection of the inner perception of the intuition in your body. Your body feels like fear, something disturbs me, or something feels comfortable, but that's a reflection of the true intuition. And it's a good starting point. But when you learn to become conscious and can center yourself, you'll have access to this direct sense. And this also you must cultivate. And increasingly today, it is an essential faculty, an essential requirement. Without that, nothing happens. Those who are most successful are those who have that intuitive sense. There's a very interesting experiment which was done. They had 100 CEOs in a room, and to each one of them, they gave a problem. They said, we have here in an envelope a number that's been written. And we want you have a paper in front of you, we want you to just guess, without thinking, just guess what the number is and write what you think it would be. Interestingly, the CEOs who were most close to the actual number were the ones who had demonstrated profitability in the last 1 year. The ones who were farthest from the number were the ones who had demonstrated losses in the last 1 year. Your ability to guess a number corresponds to your profitability or loss. But when you think about it deeply, it's obvious. There's the power of intuition. And when that is active, you navigate your way through the vicissitudes and instabilities of life's circumstances. When you don't have that intuition, all the rationality fails you, in spite of it giving you so many assurances. So all of this now brings us back to the big picture that I started with. We are formed of so many layers. Our core is you. And the more you become conscious of that, the more you can wield these layers and your capacities. And then life is a field of experience for learning, for growth, and self-actualization of your potential. So I think this is a very broad picture. I think commensurate to the breadth of the topic, title, Journey of Life, but seen from a deeper layer, deeper perspective. So I will pause here.